supercomputers that Seymour designed had a tremendous impact on our everyday lives. The safety design of cars, crash testing, exploration for petroleum, certainly the design of military aircraft, and then later the design of civilian aircraft were all areas in which supercomputers had a tremendous role.
Welcome to the Chippewa Falls Museum of Industry and Technology. CFMIT is dedicated to the history of industries in Chippewa Falls and also to provide a showcase for current industries. Okay, go ahead. In this video, you are going to learn about and hear from some of the people who played key roles in the history of supercomputers in Chippewa Falls. My name is Dave Frosch. I've been associated with one form or another of Cray since 1972. During most of that time, I was Corporate Secretary and Chief Technology Counsel. I held a similar position later with Cray, Inc., a successor company. As you will hear, Cray and Chippewa Falls took different corporate forms. From 1972 until 1996, Cray was Cray Research, Inc., a separate company. From 1996 until 2000, Cray operated as a division of Silicon Graphics. In 2000, Terra Supercomputing of Seattle bought the Cray assets and became Cray, Inc. Cray, Inc. continues to exist in Chippewa Falls. A significant part of the Cray story and the Cray history involves Seymour Cray himself. However, there were many other people who played key roles. Some of those people, as you will learn, had employment positions with all forms of Cray throughout its long history in Chippewa Falls.
Hello, my name is Jim Mondelaar. I'm a docent here at the Chippewa Falls Museum of Industry and Technology, and we're going to introduce the story of Seymour Cray in Chippewa Falls. Today we are at the exhibit that we have here at the museum. Seymour grew up on the West Hill of Chippewa Falls, and here he is on Dover Street. Seymour had a sister, Carol, and the two of them spent their summers on the upper end of Lake Wissota. When Seymour was 10, he built a device out of an erector set components that converted punched paper tape into Morse code signals. And that's the Morse code signal that we have on the wall there. He earned the Bausch and Lomb Science Award and taught physics after the teacher left for World War II. Seymour attended the UW-Madison under an ROTC scholarship program, but was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1943, serving as a codebreaker in the Philippines at the end of the war. After graduation, he was repairing televisions to make ends meet. He looked up his college professor for a job lead and was told to check out the work going on at the unused World War II glider factory. He did, and Engineering Research Associates hired him. While at Engineering Research Associates, he was designing computers to break codes for the government. In 1958, when ERA, then Remington Rand, decided to stop producing scientific computers, Seymour left the company and joined with several others in forming Control Data Corporation.
Just a little bit of a background on myself. I was in the Navy from 1951 to 1955 and was fortunate enough to attend electronics school. When I was discharged from the Navy, I was looking around for work, and I saw this ad little ad in the paper about a company called ERA that at that time was hiring engineers and technicians to work on computers. And I answered the ad, and I was fortunate enough to get a job as an electronic technician working for Engineering Research Associates. At that time, they were making computers, and I frankly didn't know anything about computers.
While at Control Data, Seymour did not like the constant interruptions and interferences from salesmen. Therefore, he convinced Control Data to set up a new laboratory in Chippewa Falls along the Chippewa River in 1962. Seymour was drawn back to Chippewa Falls to build a new laboratory on the banks of the Chippewa River as well as his new home. He also came back home to raise his children here where where his parents still lived. The museum has Seymour's desk that he actually used to control data. What you see on the desk today is the Boolean algebra that Seymour generated to describe the computer. We also have a slide rule, which Seymour is very proficient at. And you also see the clock that was on the upper corner of the desk. And this was a mechanical clock that buzzed whenever it was running.
You know, the powers that be in Minneapolis had decided that, you know, Seymour needed a secretary. He needed somebody to answer the phone. I really wasn't that interested in meeting him or anything. I mean, I wasn't that impressed. I didn't know any better. Yeah. But so I came for the interview, and it went all right because he really, you know, he didn't want a secretary underfoot. He was just obliged to take someone, and you know, apparently he thought I was all right. He offered me I can't remember what the salary was, but it wasn't as much as I was making, and I remember him saying whatever the figure was. I think he said, "How about, you know, this figure?" And I said, "How about," and this was a higher figure. So he said, "All right." So went to work for him. But I remember him saying to me, "Would you call a meeting in the lunchroom?" So I told everyone. And we went to the lunchroom at the time, and he stood up and spoke what he had to say, very minimal amount. And he'd just turn around and walk out. I mean, he was painfully shy, I would say that.
Seymour's first computer at Control Data Corporation in the Twin Cities was the 1604, which was a 48-bit computer that had 32K of magnetic core storage. Seymour's next computer at Control Data in the Twin Cities was the 160A, which was basically a scale down from the architecture of the 1604. It had it used 12-bit words and had only 4K of magnetic core storage. Basically, this is the whole thing in the desktop. It had an optical tape reader, which was a good thing at the time. Had a tape punch. And the display was Nixie tubes, vacuum tubes that could display numbers. And everything, all the control was available right here. A friend of mine checked out one of these machines, loaded all of the diagnostic programs into the core storage, crated it up, delivered it to Cape Canaveral, took it out of the crate, plugged it into the wall, ran all the diagnostics, and the install was done. So it was a very convenient portable computer. This is your first laptop computer. This is a 6400 computer, which is based on the 6600, which came first. The 6500 is yet another variation developed on scaling the 6600. The 6600 was the original supercomputer. As you can see, the modules are the same. The memory is in the same location. The logic modules are pretty much the same architecture, same hardware, and the same wiring on the back, which was all done with color-coded 26-gauge twisted pair wire.
And after this 6600 was completed, work started on a 7600. And again, the goal there was to make a system that was at least 4 times faster than the 6600. We completed the development of the 7600.
We're standing here in the interior of a Control Data 7600 computer. The reason it was built in this shape, the C shape, is to try to shorten the wires, because one of the limitations on how fast the computer could run was the length of the wires from one module to the next.
And after delivery of the first systems, and work started rather quickly on a follow-on system, which was to be called the 8600. It was a pretty steep step trying to make 4 times the speed and performance of a 8600 over that of a 7600, partly because the technology just wasn't there to allow us to do it quite easily. So we had quite a bit of difficulty trying to build the 8600.
This is the control data 8600, but the 8600 was the last computer that Seymour designed for control data. But on the test bench, we were executing 8600 instructions on the day we found out we'd been canceled.
At the same time, control data was experiencing financial problems, and one of the efforts, I believe, to reduce costs was to perhaps cut back on the development costs of the 8600. That didn't set very well with Seymour because we had actually a very small budget, and it was some time in that time period where Seymour felt that he would leave control data and start his own company. With a number of friends of his, Frank Mullaney, George Hansen, Noel Stone, Pat Dirk, and perhaps some others there, started a company called Cray Research. That was in 1972. And development then rather quickly started on building a new machine that would have been significantly faster than what was available in the marketplace. And of course, that was the 7600, as well as some competitors from IBM and one or two other companies. And the work that was started then was basically that of the Cray 1.
So this is a Cray 1. In fact, it's Serial 1, the very first machine that was built by Cray Research. It's beautiful, it's iconic, and it turned the entire numerical computing world upside down. And there's one in the Smithsonian. So how did that happen?
We also had advancements in wiring, and we were able to make wiring a lot smaller, and we were able to shrink the machine down.
Second thing that always comes to my mind about Chippewa Falls and Cray, particularly in the early days, are the people, mostly women, that put the Crays together. They wired them up. This is in the old days before microprocessors and all this microscopic technology that we actually had to make machines by hand. And these ladies would knit the machine together in a sense. They were doing the wiring. And it was very dense, very intricate. There were thousands and thousands of individual connections that they had to make by hand, and they would solder the connection. And it took them probably 3 months to put the machine together. In fact, Les Davis explained to me, he's the guy that built these machines, and I'm sure you're going to be talking to him. In any case, he explained to me, at least in the early days, that the production process was about 6 months for a Cray 1, like the one I'm sitting on. And he said, but it was really 3 months of assembly work and then 3 months of fixing the errors that had been made in the assembly work. And that was very hard, very difficult to do, to diagnose the errors and fix them. Well, these ladies got so good that they could make this machine in 3 months absolutely error-free, no errors at all. So as soon as the machine got plugged in, it worked.
My name is Sonia Gardner. I started at Cray November 1st, 1976. However, I worked at Cray from about 1974 in the wiring department. I was a temporary worker until '76.
I'm Yvonne Brunstad. Started working for Cray through tennis. One of my tennis partners was Seymour's wife, Jerry, and her business partner, Sandy McCausland. it was like a little cottage industry in that we all worked at home.
My name is Shirley Gormley, and I started at Cray November 1st of 1976. And we started in the wiring area, and then I went on into the cable area shortly after that and made all the cables that powered the systems.
And my name is Jim Mondelaar. I started with Seymour in 1974, January, and I was hired as the early checkout engineers on the Cray 1. And then I stayed with the company through the SGI split and then left SGI in 1999.
Wiring on the first chassis down at the little building down there, and they brought that thing in and they laid it down, and here was, I know, 5 million of these little blue and white wires hanging all down. They said, now, you've got this crochet hook and you've got this book that tells you pull from point A to point B, you put a solder sleeve on it and you solder it together. We're looking going, oh my Lord, how are we ever going to do this? But as I can remember, my girlfriend and I, we started after we got used to what we were doing. When we got up to doing, I forget if we got up to like 500 little wires in a day that we pulled out. And of course, then you had to make sure you didn't make a mistake, because if you did, you had to take them all apart and find the right one. So after a while, everybody could really go pretty fast. You could get your speed up. You did the little short wires first, and then they gradually got longer. And then pretty soon, the mat would be, I don't know, 6-8 inches deep. And then you would have to take your fingers and dig down in this wire mat to be able, and look with a flashlight and be able to count the little wires on these bars so that you could get your crochet hook and pull out the right one. So after a while, it got to be quite a challenge, but as we can all tell, we all did pretty good.
Well, there were probably two, if you want to call it that, teams at the time. One was maybe even three. One were the mechanical engineers headed by Dean Roush. The other was a software group headed by Bob Allen. And then the third would be the electrical engineers that I was a part of, and Harry Runkle and others were some of the engineers that were involved in doing the electrical testing and design of the machine.
So basically what we did was we kept basically the same architecture, and we went from a 5-4 gate to a 16 gate array. So we were able to put more punch into each chip, which means we could put more into each module. The other thing we did is we took what used to be a single module and we put two of them together and put connectors between them so we could have more conversation happening at in a closer range. Other than that, from a mechanical standpoint, which was my expertise, the cold bars, which used to be cast with pipes in them, became now a solid piece of aluminum, and we could gain some efficiency that way. We did the same thing with the power supply, cold plates. The power supplies in the XMP were identical to the power supplies in the Cray 1. The only thing we did is we encased them in a block of aluminum and get more power out of them. Instead of having one CPU in 4 columns like we did in the Cray 1, we now can, in those 4 columns, put 2 CPUs. So we could have double the processors and plus gain the speed from having everything closer. And we also had a gain in memory. The plates, the cold plates, were a little bit different in that we put little copper pads on the boards underneath each chip to help cool it to the cold plate. It spread the heat out, if you will. We also had to have a program where we, when we put the chips down, we had to make sure that there weren't a whole lot of hot chips in one place. So we had a software program that we just put into place, and we had that going so that we could put a lot more power onto that cold plate and get things done. At the same time we were doing the XMP, we also added the solid state disk. We didn't have that before. We just had the I/O, which is back over here. And basically, we wanted a faster solid state disk, so we had some faster memory quickly that we could get to and back.
Ever wanting to go faster and furious, Seymour was always determined to take technology and shrink it down. And the Cray 2 is a perfect example of that. Seymour decided that he was going to have to use a different cooling system though. And one of the unique things about the Cray 2 is that he came up with a liquid system using what's called liquid fluorinert. And with fluorinert, really can think of it as liquid Teflon. It will not react with anything, but yet it will be able to cool the machine by passing the fluid across the modules. And Seymour designed the modules that take advantage of that by flowing the fluid over the tops of the chips in between along sideways across the module. And on the front end would be connections for power, and on the back end would be connections for logic. We had to find a place to put the fluid when we were working on the machine, and so we came up with a reservoir that you see in the background here. This was the first model of the reservoir. And this machine would, and then we also had to be able to pass the fluid through the machine to cool the modules down. And that was done with these cabinets that you see here. And what they contained was heat exchangers that would take cold water from the customer and cool down the fluorinert and return it to the machine.
What we have here is the YMP. This was the follow-on to the XMP. Things went pretty quickly into a larger scale integration here. If you look, you can see the module down here. We have large chips that are now 2,500 gate arrays. So we've significantly increased what we can do in a chip. And I think there were 8 CPUs in here, and then the memory top and bottom beside it. If you look at both sides, you'll see the remnants of an IOP and an XMP. Same one we had on the XMP. I mean the IO and the SSD, sorry. So those really weren't changed at that time. By the way, when we did do the SSD, that was done at the same time XMP. That was actually a separate engineering project, not part of the XMP, that Jim Sundet actually ran that program when that was introduced. This, instead of being cold bars, we actually ran fluorinert through a cold plate, which was a brazed assembly. So that was basically 2 pieces of metal with fin stock in between, brazed together, and we ran the fluid through. Beyond that, we had, I don't know if you can see this, but there's 4 boards stacked up here on 2 cold plates. So again, we're talking between the cold plates. So that's why we're able to put so much into one module and actually have a whole CPU. When we put these CPUs in, they're actually quite heavy. We actually had a thing to hold them on to put them in so that we didn't bend connectors. The connector technology on this, if you see the connectors are along the side, was something new we had to come up with, because usually we just plugged in the back in the XMP in Cray 1 and Cray 2. Here the connectors were on the side, and obviously you have to slide in and then somehow move something. And we had a little pointed ramp, if you will, that we would push in there, and it would push all these tabs over one at a time all the way through. And to unplug it, you just turn the rod around the other way and pushed them back. So it was a unique little design.
Good. Now we've gotten through the YMP, and that was really a fascinating machine for its time, and Cray wasn't about to quit. So what went on after that?
Well, you know, you had brought up the C90 and the Cray 3. And we've been talking about sort of the old days at Cray when we were single focused on just the biggest computer in the world. And there came a time where we reached a turning point, and it might be of some interest to talk about that, because one of the things about Cray Research is the name. It's Cray, and the name comes from a person, Seymour Cray, and he is, you know, fundamental, obviously, to the company, but fundamental to the business itself. I mean, he was involved in the early days of computers. just after the Second World War. He worked with people like John von Neumann. He's in many ways as important to the computer business as Thomas Edison is to the electricity business. So that was always a dominant factor in the company. And yet, those of us in the company other than Seymour, and Seymour too, wanted it to be more than that, more than just one man and his work. We wanted an enterprise that could carry on, and has carried on actually, since those days. So I knew at least all along that we had to somehow be able to make computers without Seymour Cray or beyond Seymour Cray. And until we did that, it really wasn't a done deal. It wasn't complete. And we did do it. Shortly after the Cray 1 was out, Les led a team with a fellow named Steve Chen on it that came up with something called the XMP, and then that became the most powerful computer in the world. But at the same time, Seymour was working too, and then he came out with something called the Cray 2, and that became the most powerful computer in the world. And then there was a group, I think it was Steve Nelson that led a part of it at least, that came out with the YMP, and then that was the top computer in the world. So that was really fundamental, very important for the company to be able to be beyond Seymour, if I can put it that way. But in the late 80s, we ran into a problem. There were two projects going, as there had been all along. One was called the C90, and the other was called the Cray 3. And as you can imagine, the C90 was being developed by other teams inside the company, and the Cray 3 was being developed by Seymour. And as I recall the original schedule, that the Cray 3 was to be completed before the C90, and then the C90 would come out, say, 2 years later. And frankly, Seymour ran into some difficulties with the Cray 3, and it got delayed. And the C90 kept apace, and pretty soon we had a situation where the machines were going to be overlapping. They would come out at the same time. And at that point, the business as a whole kind of slowed down, and we didn't have the resources or the need to have both machines at the same time. It would confuse us, it would confuse our customers. And I was left with a dilemma, what to do. One of the projects had to be canceled and then put all of our resources in the other project. We didn't have the resources really to do both and to do them well. So I thought about it a long time, trying to figure out what are we going to do. And if I chose the Cray 3, Seymour's project, the signal would be clear. Okay, Cray is Cray. I mean, it really is Cray. And unless you're on the Cray team, Seymour's team, you're vulnerable. Because look, they canceled the C90 and went with the Cray 3. That would not be good. So let's look at it the other way. Well, we could do the C90. Well, how in the world can I do that? I'm going to cancel the project of Seymour Cray? I mean, his name is on the door. I can't do that. So it was a real dilemma. And what we did is decided in a way to do both, but not in the same organization. So I went to Seymour and I said, I know you're making progress. I know it's going to be a great project. We can't do both of them. So here's what I'd like to do. Tell me how much money you need to finish the Cray 3. And he said, well, I think about $100 million. I said, fine. So here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to set aside $100 million and give that to your project. We're going to organize your project as a separate entity, and we'll spin it off from the company. And you can take the $100 million and that technology you're working on and make a company, call it what you will. And he wanted to call it Cray, so I said fine, and that's became Cray Computers. And he moved to Colorado, and then the C90 stayed at Cray Research, and I stayed at Cray Research. That seemed more appropriate, and we came out with the C90. But it was a very traumatic experience to have to split the company in two like that. Very, very fundamental. Then things changed.
And obviously after the Cray 1, Cray 2, the natural progression is Cray 3. I think, this is just my opinion in terms of what I think happened, and it's, I'm sure a lot of other people will disagree with me. But part of what happened is Seymour wanted to make a big step forward again. And we had the XMP program going on at Cray Research, and it had actually outperformed the Cray 2. Cray 2 had its niche where it could work well, but the XMP did some other things. Seymour took what I call a big step building the Cray 3, and I think it was the downfall of the Cray 3. With technology, every time you go forward, what's important is you step out and take advantage of the technology that exists at the time, but you don't step out too far that it's not practical and you can't make it work. And in my judgment, Seymour stretched out too far. The first thing he did with the Cray 3 is he chose a new technology, gallium arsenide. Gallium arsenide had the potential of really speeding up how quickly circuits could process information. And it wasn't a technology that was available out in the marketplace. We actually started our own IC development fab at Cray so we could build the circuits, and we successfully built circuits for it. Seymour used both gallium arsenide, which was a technology that was essentially unproven yet, and he coupled that with putting them on printed circuit boards that used a lot of gold, a lot of very fine, intricate technology to bind things together, to bond things together. And in the end, what happened is he had a package that was pushing too many things too far. My understanding of the early Cray 3 is that they got one built, they shipped it to a customer, but it had too many problems in the sense of being intermittent, because there were too many connections that were done in a fashion where you just couldn't build it reliably enough to do what you wanted to do. I think had Seymour changed his plan early on and said, we're going to do it in gallium arsenide, we're going to go to a little larger array, we're going to simplify the design so we make the packaging easier, a Cray 3 or another product out of Seymour probably would have been successful.
So it's 1987, and the YMP, in its maximum configuration of 8 processors, was selling well, and the Cray 2 is moving into production. And in the background, not known to the general public, there's a project that's been going strong to build a follow-on computer to the YMP, to follow on that computer to a more powerful version. But something happened. The original project to create that computer was canceled for a variety of reasons. And along with that canceled project, the company lost a number of very talented people. So very quickly, we had to play catch up. And that was the birth. We know exactly the day and the week when we started the C90 project and worked very fast and hard to be ready when the marketplace was ready for that next machine to replace their YMP. This computer would turn out to be a 16 processor supercomputer. The YMP had 8 processors maximum. It had some other nifty features in it. We had double wide vector registers, so we could pop out more results per second. We had larger memory. In fact, the word large describes the C90. To be honest, we were pushing the envelope of what you could physically do. The C90 turned out to be colossal in size, holding all these processors with all the cooling equipment. Even though it was large and it was expensive, it was a very successful product, and many of them were sold.
'90 was formed, as Skip pointed out, when Mr. Cray went to Colorado to continue his efforts on the Cray 3 as an independent company. And he was the group that was that stayed behind were the heart of his design team. And it was an interesting sidelight that he would come back every month after I was hired, and he would interview these people, he was given permission as a part of the package, and to try to induce these people to move to Colorado Springs. And there I think the magic of Chippewa Falls comes into play in my mind, is that these people could see they could build a machine. There was a tug and pull of Chippewa Falls on one end and the inventor of the supercomputer on the other end, and the idea that the relationships were so tight that there was a very heart-rendering set of decisions that had to be made with this design team. But the heart of the previous design team stayed in Chippewa Falls and went to work and effectively and very well designed the T90 machine, which took about 4 years from the beginning to the time it went into manufacturing. The differences on the T90 machine from all the others was kind of a combination of the best, I'd like to think, being part of it, of what went on with the other two. We did use cooling that was similar to the Cray 2, only we accelerated the fluid across it because the chips were more dense in logic and therefore higher power. And we also used the attributes of the printed circuit board facility that was going, trying to achieve the objectives of the Cray 3. And we backed them off a little bit. And we used the attributes of the C90 and using three-dimensional packaging of the board so that you could get between any point on the board. And we put everything on one board and put the circuits on two sides of one board there. The other thing we did, which scared some of the manufacturing people, the wonderful ladies who did all the wire mats, is we tried to do a wireless machine. And we did that with some pretty exotic connectors that were a struggle for a while, but very creative people, one being Nick Krajewski, who was really the backbone of that area, worked it through so we could reliably connect our circuit boards to our memories and our boards to each other, our computer boards to our memory boards. And we were able to achieve that. These people were put to work on assembling the boards, and because that was another trick, to put 150 chips or so on two sides of a board, or on two sides of a single board, and then bring the thing to assembly. So micro-miniaturization and the attributes of the assembly people really came to play there.
We were often running with the C90, but there was another set of stimuli that were coming at us, and that was the microprocessor market. These small single-chip computers, and we had them those days in our personal computers, and it became clear to people, our customers, particularly some of our government customers, that these little microprocessors, like the processors that are in iPhones and in iPads and in Android cell phones, it became pretty clear that they had a lot of room to run. Well, as luck would have it, we were approached by a company that was Digital Equipment Corporation out of Massachusetts and said, hey, we've been working on something you guys might be interested in. It's a 64-bit processor. And not only that, we have some that are working. We've got some working ones, and we thought we should talk, and so we did. And that was the beginning of the Cray T3D project. And we were proud to present this product to the marketplace.
SGI acquired Cray in 1996. And at that time, Cray had two products, the T90, which was the product that Cray had developed that was the traditional, based on the traditional vector processor. And also had the T3E system, which was the second MPP system for high-performance computing that Cray had developed. That system, the T3E system specifically, became the standard for MPP high performance computer systems, and it was the standard for approximately 10 years, I would say. In 1998, the Cray business inside of SGI was developing a new system that basically blended the T3E technology and the traditional vector processor technology. So this was a cost-share development between the government and SGI. So then in 2000 along came Terra Computer, and Terra Computer purchased the Cray business from SGI. And there were three things that were of real significance and importance here. One of them was the Cray name. So they purchased the name from SGI and they changed the name of the company to Cray. This was very meaningful because Cray was a name that was well known throughout the high performance or the supercomputer industry. And also a part of that technology transfer was the contract with the government. And so we had funding for doing development. So in some ways we were a weird startup where we didn't have a lot of product at the time. We had a lot of people, we had a lot of resource. At Cray Inc., the very first system that Cray introduced, Cray Inc. I should say introduced, and was a very successful system. The third thing that was really critical in the acquisition was the people. And it's always the people that make up the company at the end of the day. So today, if you look at that microprocessor that the MPP systems are based on, it continues to ride the integrated circuit technology curve. And if I were to look at a chip today using the most leading edge technology, it can have up to 16 individual processors in a chip. And these are at a performance of approximately 50 times the performance of the Cray 1 from back in 1976 when that was introduced. So a phenomenal improvement in just individual processor performance, and now this is on a chip versus in a system like we are looking at right here. And so for Cray, that differentiation is in the interconnect technology, the memory system technology, and the software. I mean that if you took a single application and you were able to run it on this system, that it can scale to the point that it can be running across greater than 100,000 processors on a single application. And so if you go to 100,000 processors, you want to have the performance of 100,000 times it versus running on a single processor. So with these capabilities and with this differentiation, Cray Inc. now has been able to maintain a leadership position in high performance computing. As I look back to the late 80s, and specifically in 1988, Cray announced a system that could perform on a given application, a real scientific engineering type application, could perform at 1 × 10⁹ calculations per second. And since that time, the performance improvement on these systems has gone up 1,000 times approximately every 10 years. And when that performance increase has been realized by Cray Inc. prior to anyone else being able to demonstrate that capability. So that started with, in 1988, that was the YMP system. In 1998, that was the T3E system. And now today, inside of Cray Inc. in 2008, that was our MPP offering that demonstrated that before anyone else.
Cray, there was something called the Cray style that described ideal culture. Do you remember that? Was it like
Yes,
that? Was it
yes,
like that?
yes, it was really like that. It was, you know, the way I think about that is it was selflessness, and it was about not taking yourself too serious, taking what you do serious, and I believe that's what drove us.
I still work there today. It's, you know, going on 38 plus 40 years, and it's still a great company. It's still friendly people. You know, we only have about 200 people in Chippewa Falls, but I think we've got about 800 worldwide, so the rest of them are overseas. And we still get to travel, and you know, it's still a great place to work, and I think it's good for Chippewa Falls.
People didn't want to leave Chippewa Falls once they lived here. It's a great place to live, and Chippewa Falls was where they want to be. And even to this day, there's a lot of companies out there that were started by some of these people, and there's more people employed in the Chippewa area than Cray ever employed because of that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. And there's people out there with PhDs that are teaching school right now just because they don't want to leave the area and they weren't here anymore. But the people really made this happen, and there's some great people still in the companies that are left here.
We hope you've enjoyed learning about the Seymour Cray collection at CFMIT in Chippewa Falls, and we certainly hope you have a chance to come and visit.